Hello, art historians, and welcome to our second lecture over the introduction to Islamic art. In our first lecture over Islamic art, we kind of looked at how the major beliefs of Islam kind of helped shape the early art. For example, we looked at the Kaaba, which is based around Islamic beliefs. And then we also have the Dome of the Rock, which also represents Islamic beliefs, but does show that since they were a nomadic culture, they didn't have an architectural style of their own. So they're going to be very open to adopting the architectural styles of the places that they go to and that influence them. So we're really going to be able to see this in mosques because no matter where a mosque is, they are all going to have some common elements that are part of the worship practice. So one thing that you're always going to see within a mosque is what's called the Qibla wall. And the Qibla wall is always the most decorated and ornate because it is the one that designates which direction Mecca is for the people within the mosque. There's also a mihrab, and the mihrab is a kind of niche cut into the wall, which kind of also helps direct towards Mecca. So this would be in the Qibla wall. There will be a minbar, which is a pulpit of steps that usually have an arched opening at the bottom that is used for prayers. And then we also have an exterior courtyard, which would typically hold all the male members of the Islamic community. There's usually a large prayer hall. And then outside, there is usually a fountain for ritual cleansing and reflection. So the fountain and the water is definitely part of this as well. So Muhammad's home is considered to be, so Masjid is, Muhammad's home was the first mosque, right? And a mosque is not unlike other houses of worship for different belief systems, but it really does combine a great deal of things that really factors into the Islamic faith. So, for example, a mosque generally isn't just a place of worship. It's also typically can be a school. It can be a soup kitchen, for example. It can be a hospital. It is a place where you practice the belief. So, whenever people are at a mosque, it usually is a multi-purpose function to the building. Men are typically required to gather at noon on Fridays, so you will hear of what's called Friday mosques, which are for that purpose. It is customary to remove shoes. Women will cover their hair. And this is something that's not uncommon for other faiths, too. For the longest time, to go into the Vatican, it was required for women to cover their heads as well. So this is not something that's just solely Islamic. And it's customary to wear long clothes that cover the skin for both men and women when they enter a mosque. So just to kind of show you that mosques, no matter where they are, they are going to take on the regional style of the place that they are located. Because again, there was no real tradition in the Arabic world for architecture. So what we're going to see is, they're going to have the appearance of being buildings like the region that they're in. So for example, this is more of a Persian or Mughal mosque, which would definitely be customary more of farther east, so like India, Persia kind of region. Okay, so just looking at this, you can see that this is the large courtyard, which is very, very common. And then you see the water source with having a fountain there for cleansing and as part of the rituals of the belief system. You can see here's another example, an aerial view. So you have the minarets on the outside, which are the call to prayer. And then you have marking the Qibla wall. So you can see definitely which wall is the most important. On the inside is going to be that dome over the Qibla wall, which kind of marks that this is that important spot. And then you have, of course, the courtyard, and then there would be a water source there as well. So inside you would have, this is the minbar right here. So you see the steps leading up to kind of almost like a pulpit. And then this is the Qibla wall, which you can see is decorated with Arabic calligraphy. You can see the niche kind of into the wall, which would designate for the worshipers that this is the direction to face towards Mecca during prayers. And just to show you again, even the minbar, okay, so that pulpit can have a look that is based on the region that it's in. So this is a really good example right here of a minbar from Morocco, which looks distinctly different from this one. So we can't emphasize enough the meaning of the minarets. So the minarets are something that very clearly designate that this could potentially be a mosque for somebody looking at it. So it's kind of a giveaway. And they are meant to be towering because they are a visual reminder of the importance of prayer. To see the minaret kind of reminds you that this is what this is for. And again, we saw this added to the Hagia Sophia whenever it was taken over by the Ottoman Empire and they converted it to a mosque. They added the minarets on the outside, not just for architectural stability, but also as a visual reminder for minarets of the Islamic faith and the reminder to prayer, but also of the Ottoman conquest. So this is just to show you that right there. You can see this. Okay, so mosques will generally follow one of two designs for their interior. So when you're looking at the interior mosque. So one form that you would see is a very open central floor plan. And this is going to be more common in areas that are closer to the Hagia Sophia, because they're going to model their mosques off of the largest architectural structure that they saw, which would have been the Hagia Sophia. So it's very common to see mosques that have that large central dome over the top and then an open floor plan kind of focusing on that central space, big enough to hold the males there for worship. And you'll commonly also see the hanging lamps, which would be low enough to light people during their prayers. And those lights are important because typically the first and last prayers take place in darkness. So they kind of serve a function for that. There's also the hypossal hall type of mosque, which we've seen hypossal style halls before. So a hypossal style hall is going to be more common in areas where Arabics encountered the Western world. And by that, what I mean is areas where we already had the hypossal halls, like in Egypt, and we see it in Rome, and we see it in Greece. Now, as the Arabic world takes over that area or moves into that area, they adopt that as well. So a hypossal style mosque, and you're going to be able to see why, is much more common for more individual worship and an individual path to understanding, whereas the centrally designed ones are generally more for communal space. But no matter what type they are, whether they're that centrally designed or they are the hypossal style, they will maintain all those critical elements of a fountain, a courtyard, having the minarets, and having the Qibla wall with the mihrab and the minbar, and usually a very decorated ceiling or wall to designate which one the Qibla wall is. So this you can see right here is one of those more centrally designed mosques where it kind of takes place underneath a dome kind of structure. And these were very highly influenced by the Hagia Sophia's design with that huge dome sitting over the top of it. And you can see right there in front where you can see the minbar, so that know the direction that you need to stand to pray. And this is a much more open type of space, definitely much more Byzantine. Now, if you look here, you can see these arches where they alternate between white and red voussoirs, okay, or so the like bricks that basically make up the arch. That is an Islamic feature. It is generally pretty easy to figure out because they would take marble brick, or stone brick, or concrete brick, and actually the brick in between these almost is a little bit more cushiony. So in case of like structural shifting, it could almost absorb that a little bit better, almost like a shock absorber, which is really, really brilliant. But that kind of the striped arch is something that's very, Islamic in nature, that's easy to pick out. And even here you can see in like the gate area, you can see that tessellation, that repeating geometric patterns as you can look there. And of course the what am I trying to say? The chandeliers, the lights that are down low enough to light the prayer. So a really good example of one of these hypossal style mosques is actually the Mosque of Cordoba in Cordoba, Spain. Now, we are going to talk about this later, but eventually the Islamic world so the Arabic people united under Islam, and as Islam spreads to non-Arabic people, they're going to start moving westward in expansion. So remember, one of the first places they encounter is going to be the Byzantine Empire and the Persians, and the reason they were able to take the Byzantines so easily is they were so busy, fighting each other, them and the Persians. So they start making their way across North Africa through conquest, but a lot of the time their military was very advanced, but at the same time people saw the benefits of converting to Islam, because if they were taken over as part of the Arabic Islamic Empire, they could choose to convert to Islam and not pay a tax, or they could keep their religion as Christians or Jews, and then they would just have to pay a tax in order to, maintain that religious autonomy. So a lot of people would convert over to Islam. So it did spread very, very quickly across North Africa. Most of the Arabic-speaking countries that we know of are in the Middle East and North Africa, because they were the Islamic religion spread that way. And it does eventually get up into Spain, where the Islamic world for a very long time lived in relative peace alongside Christians and Jews in this area. And it's really going to only change during the Crusades later on. In fact, they almost made it all the way into France, but were stopped at the Battle of Tours by the French. So when they get into Cordoba, Spain, this is actually going to be a capital. Whenever the empire breaks apart, Cordoba was a capital of one of these fragments of what used to be the Islamic Empire. And Cordoba was actually built over the site of a Christian church, which had originally been built over a Roman temple. So the Christians built it over a Roman temple because the Romans did control Spain. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, they call Russell Crowe's character the Spaniard because he would have been a Roman born in Spain. And then here come the Muslims who conquer this and then build this mosque over the church that was there. It is, you can see from the aerial view, so if you look at the plan, you can see this open rectangular spot is going to be that open courtyard. And then you can see here at the bottom of it, you can see that designated spot where there would be a dome over the Qibla wall. And then you've got all these little dots, which would be these hypostyle columns that you would walk through that were actually taken from Roman structures that they had conquered in this area. But the problem with the columns that they took is they were way too short for the ceiling. So they had to invent double arches to stack up to actually meet the ceiling with these columns. And the horseshoe arches, we call them, because they're actually not like a rounded arch. They're more of a pointed arch, so kind of like a horseshoe was something that the Romans may have taken from the Germans. And so like the Germanic area. So that was something that they also borrowed. It's also possible that, and I just want to touch on this, that they would have seen the Roman aqueducts, which had those two layers at least of arches. So this may have been something that they actually adopted from them as well. So this is an aerial view of the Mosque of Cordoba, and you can see exactly where that Qibla wall would be because there is a designated dome over the top of it, and inside that's the most elaborate wall. And then you have the open courtyard here, so the open space, lots of vegetation, so kind of that idea of the gardens of paradise, of course. And then you have the minaret right here on the side, and then there is a fountain that's kind of out of, so you can't really see it. But if you look on the outside of this building, they've got those double layers of arches, and if you removed the minaret from this, it could very easily be misconstrued as a Roman-style building because when in Rome, as they were in what used to be part of the Roman Empire, they adopted the style that was there. So this is the interior of that hypostyle-style mosque, and you can see that it's made up of all of those columns, Corinthian columns, and then on top of them are the double-stacked arches, and you can see that they definitely have that alternating red, white, putting brick in between the marble as kind of a cushion, and then the elaborate marble columns that they would have taken from other Roman temples that are kind of all mismatched, and then this direction moving forward towards where the Qibla wall is. Now, it's really kind of amazing that they have this idea that there is no one path that one person walks to find salvation or their path to Allah. It's everybody's journey. So no matter how you wander in between the columns, you're all going towards the same location. So again, this is your hypostyle style mosque, which much more common in parts of the world that already had hypostyle style mosques. So if you take Saudi Arabia, which is where Islam begins, and you move west, this is the building style that they would have encountered, especially even in Egypt, because the Romans took that over. The Greeks had taken it over. They would have been exposed to these styles. So this is what more Western style mosques were going to look like. So this is that mihrab right here, and you can see that it's the most elaborate wall within the Mosque of Cordoba in Spain. And if you look across the top, the Arabic calligraphy looks different. It doesn't look quite like the Arabic calligraphy that we have seen. This is more of a Kufic script, which is North Africa, which would make sense because these were people who had traveled from across North Africa up into Spain. So they would have taken that more angular style with them instead of that more fluid Arabic style. So that would definitely, kind of explain that. The gold mosaic that is on here would definitely be that Byzantine and Roman influence. And then again, this particular, you can see here the Kufic script at the bottom, it's covered by that beautiful dome, right, that sits on top of it that would mark this as the most important wall within the structure. So even though mosques contain some features that are common to all of them, so again, minbar, mihrab, minbar, mihrab, Qibla wall, fountain, courtyard, and either being a communal open space or being more of a hypostyle style hall, they're going to take on, just like in the early Arabic world, they're going to take on the regional flavor or style of the places that they are built. So as different groups come in and adopt Islam that aren't necessarily Arabic, and other groups, begin to spread the Islamic faith along like the Indian Ocean trade route and the Silk Road trade route, we're going to see Islam spread all over the world, but we're going to see it mix. The basic elements of a mosque are going to mix with that native, taste of wherever it is they develop. So for example, this is going to be more of an Eastern style mosque, all right? And this one's actually built in Isfahan in Iran. So if you remember, this is Iran, Isfahan in Iran, if you put the eyes together. And you can see that this doesn't really look anything like the Mosque of Cordoba. This looks completely different. Now, there are the same elements that you would see everywhere else. You can see, for example, it's got, this is the Qibla wall because it's got the dome over it, which is definitely Byzantine influence. But it has these entrances, these big open entrances that you see right here are called iwans, right? So an iwan was actually a structural technique used in Persian palaces. And remember, Iran was Persia. They don't consider themselves Arabic, they consider themselves Persian. So they kind of take on their own regional style. Now there are those Byzantine elements, for example, the dome, but the Iwan was something that Persian rulers used in their palaces. So this kind of shows that if they're important, this is important, because those Iwans designated importance. This shows importance, not only in it as a mosque, but what is the most important Iwan in it is the most decorated and the most, important because it faces towards Mecca. So this is the Great Mosque of Isfahan, or Masjid-i-Ajami. So I probably said that wrong because I just suddenly turned that into French and I didn't mean to. So this is what we call a Friday mosque, okay, which is more for communal worship. And it does have that, major central courtyard that you can see. It does have, if I go back to this, you can see that it's got a 2-story arcade. So almost like a second floor triforium within a basilica. So that Roman and Byzantine influence did make its way into Persia, but it's going to look a little bit different in that part. So each side of the courtyard, okay, has one of those things that we called an Iwan. Okay, so those big vaulted entrances. And the Qibla Iwan is the most decorated, obviously. And what's kind of crazy about this is this mosque is placed in the middle of a very urban area, very major marketplace kind of area. And by stepping into this mosque, the people in the area could almost shut themselves off from that world. It was like a place of solace in the middle of all this busy life. And it has been added to over times, mainly by Persian rulers, such as the sultans at some point. And it was a political statement too, because there were certain doors that the royal family could go into. There were certain areas that were only in access to him. And there is an interior hypostyle style hall too. So if you look at this, okay, looking forward, you can see the water source, right, of the fountain. You can see this large open courtyard. And then on each side, so front and the sides, you see Iwans. So those vaulted entrances, which kind of looks like a barrel vault, but they're going to put their own spin on it. You can see that that's definitely the Qibla wall right there. And then off to the sides, right, you can see that these were, vaulted areas that were for private reflection, because this is a communal space. But then these were more for, for private reflection, private prayer, kind of, reflective thoughts of your own. So this is a 4E1 mosque. And if you look up here on the floor plan, you can see this. So E1, 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 and then here is this incredible, very decorated E1 right there in the center. And off to the side, you can see madrasas, okay, which were madrasas were schools. There were places for community service. There were hospitals. There were all of these different things incorporated into this. Now, this is something that is very unique to Islam, and this is going to be called the Muqarnas Dome. So where you can see right here, where they kind of go like this a little bit, instead of it just being a rounded dome, right, it has that, kind of in, out, like that. That's called a Muqarnas, and it's something that highly identifies something as being Islamic. And what this helped to do is really capture the light, whenever, especially if it was in an interior space, and reflect that light on all angles, on all the parts of this. And you can see the beautiful mosaic work. We can see the arabesques around it. We can see the tessellation and repeating patterns. Remember that idea of vegetation and paradise. And then, of course, you can see this is more Arabic type of script than you would see in Africa. It's more of that fluid Arabic style. So this is the floor plan of the Great Mosque of Isfahan. You can see the fountain. You can see the E1s are around it. Very beautiful. So I wanted to show you guys exactly where this came from. So the Sassanid, I can never say it right, I'm so sorry, dynasty. I've been teaching this for 14 years and I still can't say that right. It's just one of those words like, you know, oil. I can't say that right either. I don't know. So the Sassanid dynasty was the last dynasty to rule Persia prior to the arrival of the Islamic world, when it was taken over by the Abbasid Empire. So these palaces that the Sassanids had, which you can see from an aerial view, this almost looks like the Mosque of Isfahan, but it's not. It's actually a palace complex. And you can see those very large Iwans that would have shown the power of the rulers that lived here. So again, to put those Iwans inside a mosque shows not only the importance of it being a mosque and in a religious structure, but also designating which is the most important Iwan. You can see right here, that's an Iwan in a Persian palace. And you can see the people down there at the bottom and how small they are. Like, these were absolutely massive. Now, we are going to see centrally designed structures as well, because we haven't really looked at those yet. These have kind of been more on an axis, all right? So in 1299, you get a group of Turks, and the Turks are actually from East Asia originally and East Central Asia, and they migrate down across Asia, and they come through the Arabic Islamic world, and they adopt Islam. And then as the Turkish groups break apart, because they are a nomadic group of different tribes, as they break apart and settle in places like Egypt, or they settle in the Byzantine Empire, they take that faith with them. And one of those groups was the Seljuk Turks, and those were the ones that actually ended up starting the Crusades. And then later that will transition into the Ottoman Turks, who will take over the Byzantine Empire and establish what was called the Ottoman Empire, which will actually last until World War I. So obviously they are going to show, because the Byzantine Empire was primarily Christian, so you need to reinforce your role as Islamic rulers. So they are going to adopt major building projects to visually show the power of themselves and also of the faith that they bring with them, and maybe the hopes that people will convert, you know, and switch over to them, because they know they're the minority in this area. Plus, they're right next door to Europe. They want to really impress the people next door who are going to be coming into this area. And of course, in the Byzantine Empire, what is the standard of excellence? And that's the Hagia Sophia. So we're going to get the Great Mosque of Selim II, which was one of the greatest rulers of the Ottoman Empire. And it's going to be built by an architect named Sinan, who is so famous that he is known for being the architect for Suleiman the Magnificent, all right, the great ruler who is going to end up, doing so much and expanding the empire super far. But he works for several of these, these Islamic rulers, and gains quite a reputation for it. So they liked the idea of the dome, because the dome in their mind, because it was panoramic, could almost represent that idea of heaven. So placing the dome over this, including over the Qibla wall, could kind of invoke that idea of heaven, kind of like the Byzantine mosques did, or Byzantine churches did with their gold mosaic. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so that's the exterior view of it, of Sinan's vision of the Mosque of Salim or Suleiman. And you can see those huge towering minarets over it, which basically shows the towering of it over everything, including the Christian world that was here. And you can see that this was meant to encompass, like basically take the design of the Hagia Sophia and make it even better and even more supreme and even more elaborate. You can see that kind of right here. But it does have that Byzantine post-classical Roman look to it. You're taking Roman arches, you're taking Corinthian style columns, you've got the dome, of course, but then you have obviously all of the Islamic elements as well. I just love looking at this dome. It is just the most beautiful, beautiful thing. And you can see that that is that Byzantine adoption of having the halo of windows that would bring in all of this magnificent light, kind of illuminating the words of Allah, which are written around it. And you can see the Arabic script at the top and in the little medallions there. And you can see the muqarnas around the sides of it, that little like this, that makes the dome look even more weightless. I mean, because it's not just one solid piece. It's just another view of it right here. This is actually called a squinch, by the way. This is where instead of a pendentive that the Byzantines used, you just basically take a square structure and kind of put a little gap between the corners so that the dome would sit on it instead of it being like the curved pendentives like the Hagia Sophia. And also, again, as this was very typical with other mosques, it was meant to be multi-purpose to kind of fulfill those values of giving and charity. So there was a hospital, a school, a library. There were public services for the people of this community, which kind of, was in good faith to the people that they had conquered. So just another example of like the outside of it. So you can definitely see that Roman Byzantine look to it with the two levels of arcades and the columns there. And again, mosques reflect the ideologies of Islam. A building reflects an ideology. It's what a particular place stands for. It's who they are. It's a visual representation of that. Sometimes they'll also contain mausoleums of patrons or rulers who basically were building a place in paradise because they had given in order to build a place for others to worship. So this is just some example of other mosques, and you can see that the outward appearance may look different and the style may vary depending on the part of the world, but the basic elements are all still going to be there. So for example, this is definitely one of those centrally designed mosques that's based kind of like the Great Mosque of Salim or Suleiman, and you can see the minarets there. This one is in the middle of, I believe, New York. I can't remember exactly, but you can see that it's got the dome over the top of it, so kind of taking on that neighborhood flair. This one we will actually learn about this year. This was in Guinea, Africa, so they took what they had, and it has that regional appearance to it, but these are the minarets on the outside. This one, I believe, is in Java. It's in Indonesia, I know that. Malacca, maybe, in that area. And you can see it's very light, kind of like the ocean that's there. There's the minaret off to the side, and it's centrally designed. This one, I believe, is Thailand. I don't have them right in front of me, but I think it's really cool. This one, if I remember from my notes, is actually located in the UAE. I believe this one's in Saudi Arabia, around the Arab Emirates, but I just think it's amazing how, like, it's this advancing technological city and they've incorporated that into their mosque. I just think that's really neat. This one's in China. So you can see that it's almost got that pagoda appearance to it, and especially on the minarets, but it does have that dome over the top of it. It's just kind of incredible. I don't remember, but that is a mosque. And this one, of course, is kind of in between Persia and India, so kind of showing the spread of that Persian style into India over time. Don't remember this one either, but I just think, oh, this one's East Asia. I can't remember if this one's Japan maybe or Korea. I can't remember, but it's definitely Eastern in nature. I believe it's Japan actually, because it has the appearance of like a Shinto temple. I'm gonna have to look these up. I completely forgot to look. That's the inside of it. I just think that is so amazing how it's like this new modern take on a very old idea. Also in the Middle East, and you can see the minarets, and then they have on it all this decorative floral appearance to it, which is just stunning to me. That one is also in China, which is pretty cool. That may be Cambodia. Actually, I have to think about it. That one's St. Louis. That one I actually know. That one's actually located near Afton, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's towards Afton. So you can see the minaret right there and then the dome over the top of it. Pretty neat. So sorry that I forgot where everything is located. I usually have that like down at the bottom and I just forgot to look. But you still get the idea that a mosque is a mosque no matter where it is, but it will take on the regional appearance of the place that it is located.